Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Jared, and today we are going to be talking about The Last of Us Part 1 and 2. With the recent release of the second season of The Last of Us TV series, I thought that this would be the perfect time for me to go back and replay the first two games in this series and talk about them here with you guys. And I am so glad that I sat down to play both of these games back to back, because when you play these games back to back, they really do inform each other and they serve as a complete whole to a very complex story that deals with issues of love, hate, revenge, and ultimately forgiveness. And I think that it is absolutely integral to play this series and experience it for yourself, because I think for the most part, The Last of Us Part 1 and Part 2 together tell one of the greatest video game stories of all time. And I am finally glad to talk about it with you guys here. But before we get into all of that, I think I should at least briefly mention my experience with both games of this franchise. I played the very first game back when it was originally released. I was a big fan of Naughty Dog's Uncharted series, and so I was looking forward to this. But ultimately, when I played the game the first time, I really enjoyed it. I even loved it, but I really didn't see it as that all-time, one of the greatest video games of all time. I think it has great gameplay, but I think it is ultimately the story of that game and the characters and how that story is done and how the theming ties into the narrative itself is what makes it so special. And then we move forward with the second game, which I took a while to finally get to that game because of the huge backlash that it got when it was originally released from a lot of toxic fans, or fans that were disappointed in the direction that the video game took. But when I played that game for the very first time, I absolutely fell in love with it. I was understanding exactly what it was trying to say, and it left a very powerful impression on me that has stuck with me to this very day. And I would even say that The Last of Us Part 2 is one of my all-time favorite video games of all time. So let's get started and talk about both of these monumental games. Ultimately, what I think of when I play both The Last of Us Part 1 and Part 2 back to back is it is a story of consequences. We see from the very first game the actions that make up that story, how those actions have consequences in the second game. You see that the first game informs the second game in a very powerful and very heartbreaking way. And I think that's what makes these two games work so well. You see the action and reaction of what people do in this dog-eat-dog world. And so I think probably the best way to talk about both of these games is to just really go in chronological order and start by talking about the first game as a whole. When I was playing The Last of Us Part 1 this time, I was really focusing in on the story and the themes in particular and what that game is ultimately about. And it touches on quite a few things, and it mainly focuses on love and choice. We see at the very beginning of this story that Joel is a very broken man who loses his daughter at the very beginning of the zombie apocalypse, and it creates within him a much darker figure than we might have assumed him to be at the very beginning of the game before everything turns bad. And so we see 20 years pass, and we see how he has transformed into a shell of his former self. There are still inklings there, but he is definitely a changed and scarred man. And so when he is introduced to Ellie and he has to take her across the United States to hopefully be able to get some kind of cure for this disease, then it really starts to hit you what this story is about, because we slowly begin to see Joel and Ellie's relationship build and build into a father-daughter type of relationship. And we see that Joel reconnects with somebody, which is something that he hasn't been able to do for so long. And we kind of see him finally get a little bit of his daughter back by projecting onto Ellie, which is honestly both a detriment to his character and something that ultimately defines him. He is defined by his love for Ellie, and it's his relationship that he builds with Ellie that leads him down an even darker path as we continue on with this story. And when we get to the climax, we see that his choices lead to some very dark consequences. We see how he is affected by how much he really needs Ellie in this world. He is not willing to give her up for his one connection that he has made, that has defined him, that has changed him, perhaps for the better. But is it ultimately worth the sacrifice of potentially saving billions of lives? And that is the question that we tried to answer in The Last of Us Part 2. The Last of Us Part 2 is one of the greatest video game stories of all time. And I know that some people will probably not agree with that sentiment, but I think that The Last of Us Part 2 tells a very compelling story that takes upon the previous themes of the first game and enhances them in a very compelling way. Because right from the beginning, we see in The Last of Us Part 2 the consequences of Joel's actions. We see that though he was acting out of selfish love, there are other people in this world that are harmed by the violence that we partake in. And The Last of Us Part 2 is about that cycle of violence and how revenge can really destroy your soul. Because The Last of Us Part 2 focuses on revenge, the cycle of violence, and ultimately forgiveness. And not only does Ellie have to learn to forgive Abby for the consequences of her actions in killing Joel in the very beginning of the game, we also have to forgive Joel and Abby and even Ellie. And that is extremely powerful, and why this story resonated with me so well. Because it is a journey into darkness. We see as we play through Ellie through this game, after the death of Joel, she is a broken human being. She has lost a father figure that she was having some difficulty with herself. And I think it really shows how we kind of take life for granted. We think that perhaps there will be a tomorrow, and there might not be. And in that case with Ellie, there wasn't another tomorrow with Joel. And so she never gets to fully experience her forgiveness of him or her attempt to forgive him. And that is so tragic, because Ellie goes down such a dark path in this story that she ultimately becomes incredibly unlikable. If you play the first half of this game and you find yourself not enjoying the story at all, it might very well be because the story is leading you down this path that what Ellie is doing is wrong. She is a straight up murderer in this story because she is in it for one particular goal: to kill Abby and her friends for what they did to Joel. And so that is what she focuses on, and it's what leads to her losing her soul by the end of the story. She is a broken shell of the person that she was in the original game. And it's incredibly tragic, and we see the cycle of violence because Joel killed Abby's father. So Abby kills Joel. So Ellie goes to kill Abby. And we see how the cycle of violence will just continue and continue and continue until everybody has lost their humanity. And that's really, really incredible, I think. And you know what's also incredible to me? The second half of the story, which actually plays closer to the tone of the first Last of Us. It's a lot more lighthearted, and it's so funny because the entire second half of this game has you play as Abby, who killed Joel, who killed our main character from the first game. And so it challenges you to see her perspective, to understand her, and if you let the story take a hold of you, you might actually begin to care about her. And I truly did begin to care about Abby and her story because she is just as broken as Ellie is. She too lost her father, and she is simply continuing the cycle of vengeance, and she begins to believe again in humanity when she meets other characters such as Val and Lev, and that is so integral to not only her story but Ellie's story, because the story of The Last of Us Part 2 puts these two at oppositions, but we see how connected they truly are. And in the final moments of the game, when Ellie decides it's not worth it, she has lost everything, and the violence and her potentially killing Abby, that's not going to bring Joel back. That's not going to satisfy her. It's just going to break her down even more. And when she finally gives up, despite the fact that she has lost everything, Ellie has finally learned that the cycle of violence has to end for this all to end. And it leaves you with a very, very tough ending to swallow. And it's why The Last of Us Part 2 resonates with me so well. The theming is so well done. It informs from the first game, and we see it in this game. And we see the consequences of actions, and we see the reactions to it. And it's incredibly powerful, and one of the best stories that I have personally ever seen for a video game. Now, with rumors of there being a part 3, I am interested to know what the story will ultimately be. Obviously, we could debate on what the story would be all day. We ultimately don't know until something is announced or until that video game finally materializes. However, I think with how the story has gone so far and the bleakness of that second act, I think that the third game will potentially be focused on hope more than anything. But that is just my personal opinion. Ultimately, I love these two Last of Us games. I think they are phenomenal games. I do not think that The Last of Us Part 1 is one of the greatest video games of all time. I said that I think that the gameplay is perfectly fine, but it is ultimately the story, and a pretty simple story at that, that is just so well told. But I think The Last of Us Part 2 is something that I will be digesting for a very long time. It is a powerful story, and if you let it take hold of you, you will ultimately be rewarded, as I was. So ultimately, what would I give both games? Well, for The Last of Us Part 1, I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. I don't think it's a perfect game, but it does have a perfect story, and it's fun to boot. Now, as for The Last of Us Part 2, this is a game that obviously I adore a whole lot. I think about it constantly. I love the themes that it explores, and it's just one of the best stories that I have seen told in the video game medium, so I'm going to give it a coveted 10 out of 10. These games are great, and I think that they are worth experiencing for anybody, and they're worth re-experiencing because they really do have a great story worth telling, and they're just fun games. Even in the darkest of moments, they can be extremely rewarding, and it's kind of why I wanted to talk about that here, because I think that there is a lot to pull from both of these games, and so I hope I did a little bit of that here. I know I probably rambled on quite a bit and repeated myself, but you know what? I don't really care. I love these two games, and they're definitely worth your time. But that's all I got for you guys. I hope you enjoyed this, and as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and stay positive.